The first mistake people make about disrespect is believing it begins with another person's behavior. It does not. Disrespect begins much earlier, at the moment someone discovers that your standards can be negotiated. Before they interrupt you, dismiss your opinion, mock your boundaries, or treat your presence as insignificant, they have already been watching. Human beings constantly study one another, often without realizing it. They observe what you tolerate, what you forgive, what you explain, what you overlook, and perhaps most importantly, how badly you need their approval. This is where the real battle begins. People do not always disrespect weakness because they hate the weak. More often, they disrespect what they believe they can control. Every unnecessary concession teaches people something about you. Every boundary you announce but fail to enforce becomes evidence that your words carry little consequence. Eventually, people stop listening to what you say and begin responding only to what you consistently do. This is why self-respect is more than a virtue. It is a signal. It tells the world that your dignity has a price, and that you are willing to walk away rather than pay it with your principles. The strongest person in the room is rarely the one demanding attention. They do not need to remind everyone of their importance. They do not chase recognition or force themselves into every conversation. They can remain silent, and that silence has weight. Why? Because their identity does not depend upon the reaction of the people around them. Someone who desperately needs approval can be controlled through praise. Someone who fears rejection can be controlled through withdrawal. Someone obsessed with being understood can be controlled through criticism. But a person who has already decided what they will and will not tolerate becomes much harder to manipulate. You cannot easily threaten someone who is willing to leave. You cannot easily shame someone who does not require your approval. And you cannot easily control someone who has learned to stand alone. This is the hidden power of self-respect. It changes the calculation. People begin to understand that crossing your boundaries may cost them something valuable: access to you. And access is often more powerful than confrontation. Consider the people who naturally command respect. They are rarely the loudest. They do not spend every conversation proving their intelligence. They do not explain every decision or defend every opinion. They understand something most people discover too late. The more you try to prove your worth, the more you suggest that your worth is still uncertain. A secure person does not need to convince everyone. They simply behave according to their standards. Now consider the opposite. Someone constantly searching for acceptance laughs when others humiliate them. They apologize when no apology is necessary. They change their opinions to avoid disagreement. They tolerate repeated violations because they fear losing the relationship. At first, this behavior may appear kind. Eventually, it becomes predictable. And what begins as kindness can become entitlement. People adapt to whatever you repeatedly allow. This is one of the most uncomfortable laws of human behavior. People learn your boundaries through consequences, not declarations. You can tell someone, "Don't speak to me that way." But if you continue rewarding them with your attention after they do it, your actions have delivered a stronger message than your words. You have taught them that the boundary is negotiable, and once a boundary becomes negotiable, people begin testing how far it can be moved. The test may start with something small: a disrespectful joke, a dismissive comment, an interruption, a broken promise. You ignore it. The next test becomes larger. Eventually, you find yourself asking how someone who once respected you became comfortable treating you this way. The answer is often uncomfortable. They did not suddenly change. They learned. They learned what you would tolerate. This is why respect is not created by endless agreeableness. Kindness may make people appreciate you, but standards make them take you seriously. There is a difference. A person who is kind without boundaries becomes useful. A person who is kind with boundaries becomes respected. True confidence does not announce itself. It does not threaten. It does not create dramatic scenes. It simply withdraws when necessary. Sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is not an argument. It is distance. Not because you are afraid to fight, but because you understand that not every battle deserves your energy. This is where emotional control becomes a form of power. The person who loses control gives the other side information. Their anger reveals what hurts them. Their desperation reveals what they fear losing. Their frantic explanations reveal what they need others to believe. Emotion can become a map to your vulnerabilities. The disciplined person gives away far less. They listen, they observe, they decide, then they act. This brings us to another principle of social power. Your words become more valuable when you use fewer of them. People often believe authority comes from speaking more. It does not. Authority often comes from knowing when silence is the stronger move. The person who explains every decision gives others countless opportunities to challenge it. The person who constantly defends themselves unintentionally places their critics in the position of judges. But the person who can calmly say, "This is my decision," and move forward without seeking approval communicates something entirely different. They have already judged themselves. They do not require a committee to determine their worth. This does not mean becoming cold, arrogant, or incapable of communication. It means becoming deliberate. Speak when your words create value. Explain when explanation serves a purpose. Defend yourself when defending yourself protects something important. But never explain simply because you are uncomfortable with someone misunderstanding you. You cannot control every person's interpretation of you. Trying to do so is a form of psychological slavery. And the more you reveal, the more predictable you become. Predictability has a cost. When people know exactly what provokes you, they know how to provoke you. When they know exactly what praise you crave, they know how to flatter you. When they know exactly what rejection you fear, they know how to control you. This is why emotional discipline matters. You do not need to hide your entire personality. You simply need to stop giving everyone unrestricted access to your inner world. Mystery creates space. Space creates uncertainty. And uncertainty forces people to proceed more carefully. Watch what happens when someone enters a room and immediately begins talking. They reveal their opinions, ambitions, insecurities, relationships, frustrations, and desires before anyone has even asked. Now compare that person with someone who watches first. They listen. They notice who seeks attention, who interrupts, who becomes defensive, who changes personality around authority, who desperately wants to be liked. While everyone else is revealing themselves, the observer is collecting information. And information creates leverage. This is why restraint is not weakness, it is preparation. Imagine two leaders entering the same meeting. One speaks constantly. He interrupts, he fills every silence, he attempts to dominate every discussion. The other listens. He allows everyone to reveal their positions. He watches the alliances forming. He notices hesitation, confidence, contradiction, and hidden motives. Then when the moment comes, he speaks briefly, perhaps only a few sentences. But those sentences matter because they are precise. People remember them. Why? Because restraint creates weight. When someone speaks only when necessary, others instinctively pay closer attention. The same principle applies to conflict. When criticized, the insecure person reacts immediately. They explain their intentions. They defend every detail. They attempt to prove that the other person is wrong. The disciplined person pauses. They ask themselves a different question. Does this criticism deserve a response? Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. That distinction is power. Not every accusation deserves your energy. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every insult deserves retaliation. Your attention is a resource. Spend it as carefully as you spend money. Because the moment you allow someone to determine where your attention goes, they have acquired a degree of control over you. The goal is not to make everyone fear you. Fear is unstable. The deeper goal is to become someone whose boundaries are understood. Someone whose silence communicates more than another person's threats. Someone whose absence is felt because their presence was never cheap. And this is the foundation of real social power. Do not demand respect. Build a life in which disrespect automatically removes access to you. When people realize that your principles are not negotiable, your attention is not guaranteed, and your dignity cannot be purchased with approval, their behavior changes. Not because you force them to respect you, but because you change the consequences of failing to. That is the difference between demanding power and possessing it. The first requires constant effort. The second becomes part of your character. And once people understand that you can walk away without hatred, without revenge, and without begging to be understood, they discover something far more intimidating than anger. They cannot control you by threatening to take away what you are already willing to leave behind. The less ammunition you provide, the harder you become to challenge. Silence has a strange effect on people. Most cannot tolerate an empty space for long. When you stop filling the silence, they begin filling it themselves. They talk. And as they talk, they reveal. Opinions slip out. Fears surface. Ambitions become visible. Insecurities appear between sentences. Motives that would have remained hidden under careful conversation begin exposing themselves. Meanwhile, you observe. This creates an imbalance that most people fail to recognize. You begin understanding them while they know increasingly little about you, and knowledge, when combined with restraint, creates power. Speaking less does not mean thinking less. It means refusing to turn every thought into public information. It means replacing impulse with calculation, emotion with observation, and noise with purpose. When every word is measured, people stop judging you by quantity. They begin judging you by significance. Eventually, they learn a simple rule. When this person speaks, there is probably a reason. That is when words acquire weight. But words alone are never enough. If your boundaries exist only in conversation, people will eventually discover that they are not boundaries at all. They are suggestions. This is why boundaries reveal the difference between someone who asks for respect and someone who commands it. Every boundary you establish sends a message. Every boundary you fail to enforce sends an even louder one. Human beings pay attention to patterns. They may listen to what you promise, but they ultimately believe what you repeatedly demonstrate. If your behavior contradicts your standards, your behavior becomes the truth. Disrespect rarely arrives as a dramatic event. It usually begins quietly: a sarcastic remark, an interruption, a promise broken for the third time, a colleague taking credit for your work, a friend appearing only when they need something, a person testing how much they can take from you without consequences. The first violation may seem insignificant, but the real danger is not the violation itself. It is what the violation teaches. If someone crosses a small boundary and discovers that nothing happens, curiosity begins. How far can I go? They test again, and if the second test succeeds, the boundary moves again. Eventually, what began as a minor act becomes a pattern, not necessarily because the other person is malicious, because you taught them that the cost was low. This is one of the most uncomfortable realities of human behavior. People respect what they know they cannot casually obtain or violate. Consistency, therefore, becomes a form of authority. If your standards disappear whenever someone is attractive, powerful, popular, or important to you, people notice. Your principles become conditional. But when your behavior remains stable regardless of who stands before you, something changes. Your reputation begins arriving before you do. People become more careful. They already know what happens when a line is crossed. This is why the desire to be liked can become dangerous. Many people fear boundaries because they fear rejection. They want everyone comfortable. They want no conflict. They want to be seen as kind. But the pursuit of universal approval has a hidden price. You gradually sacrifice your own position to preserve everyone else's comfort. Eventually, people may appreciate everything you do for them while respecting very little about you. They value your usefulness, not your boundaries, not your principles, not your presence, your usefulness. And there is a profound difference. The person who gives everything without limits eventually teaches others to expect everything. The person who gives deliberately teaches others to value what they receive. Strong boundaries, therefore, do not require anger. They require consistency. Imagine someone repeatedly speaks to you with contempt. The insecure response is immediate: anger, arguments, threats, promises of consequences that are never carried out. The disciplined response is different. No performance, no revenge, no dramatic announcement. You simply change the level of access. Less attention, less availability, less participation. And if the behavior continues, perhaps no access at all. There is tremendous psychological force in this response because it removes the argument entirely. You are not trying to convince them that they were wrong. You are demonstrating that their behavior has consequences. There is no drama, only distance. And distance communicates something anger often cannot. You no longer have access to me. This is not punishment. Punishment seeks to make another person suffer. A boundary seeks to protect your position. One is emotional, the other is strategic. When people realize that your decisions are based on principle rather than temporary anger, they begin taking you more seriously. They know where they stand. Honesty earns trust. Manipulation receives no reward. Repeated disrespect produces distance. The rules are simple, and simplicity creates certainty. Paradoxically, people often respect firm boundaries even when they dislike them. Why? Because predictable strength feels safer than unpredictable weakness. If someone knows exactly what you will tolerate, they can adjust. But if you tolerate everything one day and explode the next, no one knows where you stand. That unpredictability does not create authority, it creates instability. There is another psychological effect that makes boundaries powerful. When someone loses access to your time, attention, or presence because they crossed a line, the mind begins connecting disrespect with loss. That lesson is stronger than a lecture. People forget speeches, they remember consequences. Every relationship teaches people how to treat you. Every compromise teaches them something. Every reaction teaches them something. Every decision becomes part of the lesson. If your standards collapse under pressure, people eventually learn that pressure works. But if your standards survive pressure, they learn something entirely different. They learn that you cannot easily be moved. And once people understand that disrespect has a predictable cost, many of them stop testing you altogether. But there is one final test. A boundary can be strong, your words can be measured, your reputation can be solid. Yet none of it matters if someone can control you simply by provoking your emotions. This is where many people discover that their supposed power was only an illusion. Someone insults you in public. They question your authority. They mock you. They attack something you are proud of. And suddenly, the entire strategy disappears. You react. That is the moment they learn they have found the lever. Your greatest enemy is no longer the person provoking you. It is your own reaction. Because whoever can control your emotions can influence your decisions. And whoever can predict your decisions can begin controlling your behavior. This is one of the oldest principles of power. The ability to control yourself is more important than the ability to control others. Anger narrows perception. Wounded pride creates blind spots. Frustration encourages impulsive decisions. And an intelligent opponent needs very little strategy when you reveal exactly what provokes you. One insult becomes a button. They press it. You react. They press it again. You react again. Soon they do not need to defeat your argument. They only need to trigger you. Every emotional explosion gives away information. Anger reveals what matters to you. Defensiveness reveals what threatens you. Desperation reveals what you fear losing. Even excessive excitement can reveal intentions before the right moment. The calmer you remain, the less information you surrender. This is why powerful people create distance between feeling and action. They still experience anger. They still feel disappointment. They still experience fear. But they do not immediately obey those emotions. They pause. And that pause is where power lives. Imagine two people receiving the same insult. The first reacts instantly. His voice rises. He argues. He explains. He tries desperately to prove the other person wrong. The second listens. He pauses. Perhaps he answers with one sentence. Perhaps he says nothing. The audience notices the difference. The insult becomes less important. The reaction becomes the story. And the person who refuses to be emotionally controlled suddenly appears difficult to manipulate. This does not mean becoming emotionless. It means refusing to let temporary feelings make permanent decisions. Most people expect predictable reactions. Insult them, they become angry. Threaten them, they panic. Challenge their status, they become defensive. But when you refuse to behave according to the script, uncertainty appears. They begin wondering, what is this person thinking? Why aren't they reacting? What will they do next? That uncertainty creates caution, and caution is often the beginning of respect. History is filled with people who understood this principle. Leaders, negotiators, strategists, and influential figures learned that emotional discipline preserves options. The person who reacts immediately gives away options. The person who remains composed keeps them. There is another advantage: reputation. People may eventually forget the argument. They rarely forget the person who remained composed while everyone else lost control. Over time, composure becomes part of your identity. People begin to understand that intimidation does not work, insults do not work, emotional manipulation does not work, and once that reputation is established, many conflicts disappear before they begin, because people naturally search for easier targets. In the end, people do not fear the loudest person in the room. They become cautious around the person they cannot emotionally control. But even that is not the highest level of power. There is something deeper: value. Human beings protect what they fear losing. If your attention is unlimited, your time is always available, and your presence can be obtained without effort, people eventually stop recognizing its value. Availability creates familiarity. Familiarity can create entitlement, and entitlement can destroy appreciation. The goal is not to become unavailable for the sake of appearing important. The goal is to make your presence meaningful. Let your attention have limits. Let your time have standards. Let your presence be connected to mutual respect. Then something changes. People no longer think only about what they can gain from you. They begin thinking about what they might lose. And when people understand that losing access to you is a real possibility, they begin treating that access differently. This is the final principle. Do not waste your energy demanding that people recognize your value. Build yourself into someone whose absence makes the value obvious. That is when respect stops being something you ask for. It becomes something people calculate before they risk losing it. Familiarity without value eventually produces indifference, and indifference is often where disrespect begins. People rarely appreciate what they believe they can obtain whenever they want. Unlimited access slowly destroys the perception of value. When your attention is always available, your time is constantly surrendered, and your presence can be summoned at any moment, people stop experiencing those things as gifts. They begin experiencing them as rights. This is why attention must be treated as a resource. Every minute you give away carelessly communicates something about what your time is worth. Every interruption you accept, every priority you abandon, and every demand you immediately satisfy teaches people how easily your attention can be purchased. Scarcity changes the equation. Throughout history, what is rare has been treated as more valuable than what is abundant. The same psychological principle operates in human relationships. The person who is always present is easily overlooked. The person whose presence carries purpose is remembered. This does not mean playing games or pretending to be unavailable. Artificial scarcity is transparent. People eventually recognize when someone is merely performing importance. Real value requires no performance. It comes from having priorities that do not disappear whenever someone calls. Many people destroy their own value by becoming endlessly accessible. They answer every message immediately. They cancel their plans for others. They abandon their own priorities to solve everyone else's problems. At first, this looks generous. Then something changes. People stop appreciating your availability because they begin expecting it. What was once kindness becomes obligation. And the moment you finally say no, they become offended. Notice the psychology. They are not necessarily angry because you harmed them. They are angry because you changed the rules they had become comfortable with. This is why availability without boundaries can create entitlement. Look at the people who possess genuine influence. They are not necessarily difficult to reach because they are arrogant. Their time is simply organized around priorities. Their attention is directed toward what matters. They do not allow every distraction to become an emergency. As a result, when they give someone their attention, that attention has meaning. Selectiveness creates value. But there is a deeper source of value that cannot be manufactured through scarcity. Competence, knowledge, discipline, reliability, character. These are assets that become more powerful with time. You can pretend to be mysterious. You can pretend to be important. You can manufacture an image. But genuine competence eventually exposes the difference between appearance and substance. People may question a title. They may challenge a reputation. But consistent results are difficult to argue with. The person who repeatedly creates value possesses something far more important than admiration. They possess options, and a person with options is difficult to control. This is why chasing attention is dangerous. Attention can disappear tomorrow. Applause can become silence. Compliments can become criticism. Popularity can reverse overnight. But ability remains. Character remains. Discipline remains. If your confidence depends on how people respond to you, then your confidence belongs to them. The moment their approval disappears, so does your sense of power. But when confidence comes from knowing what you can do, what you stand for, and what you are capable of becoming, external approval loses much of its influence. People sense this independence, and it changes the interaction. They realize they cannot easily control you through praise or rejection. There is another test of value that most people avoid: the ability to leave. Many remain in relationships, friendships, workplaces, and environments that continually diminish them because they are terrified of what happens afterward. They fear being alone, they fear starting again, they fear losing what little security they have. And when another person senses that fear, the balance changes. If someone believes you have nowhere else to go, they know you are unlikely to leave. That knowledge weakens your position. But when someone understands that you would rather walk away than permanently compromise your dignity, the calculation changes. Suddenly, the possibility of losing you becomes real, and people become much more careful with what they believe they can take for granted. This is not manipulation. It is not arrogance. It is not pretending to be superior. It is the natural consequence of building a life that does not depend entirely on another person's approval. Your purpose becomes stronger than your need to be liked. Your standards become stronger than your fear of rejection. Your future becomes more important than temporary comfort. And something strange happens. The less desperately you seek attention, the more naturally attention finds you. The people who command lasting respect are rarely those constantly demanding recognition. They are the ones whose absence becomes noticeable. Their value is felt most clearly when they are no longer present. But becoming valuable is only half the battle. The other half is becoming consistent, because value without consistency creates uncertainty, and uncertainty destroys reputation. By now you may understand that respect begins with self-respect. It grows through disciplined speech. It is protected by boundaries. It is strengthened by emotional control, and it becomes difficult to ignore when it is supported by genuine value. But none of these principles matter if they exist only as ideas. People do not ultimately judge you by what you claim to believe. They judge you by what you repeatedly do. Your reputation is not built from intentions. It is built from patterns. And once enough patterns accumulate, your reputation begins speaking before you do. Anyone can claim to be disciplined. Anyone can announce that they deserve respect. Anyone can speak about loyalty, courage, integrity, or strength. But words disappear when behavior contradicts them. If people repeatedly watch you abandon your standards under pressure, they eventually stop believing the standards exist. If they repeatedly watch you remain firm when doing so costs you something, another conclusion emerges. They begin believing that your principles are real. This is why consistency is one of the quietest forms of power. Most people are consistent only when circumstances are favorable. They are confident when everyone agrees, disciplined when motivation is high, strong when there is no real pressure, but introduce resistance, temptation, rejection, or fear, and suddenly their principles become negotiable. People notice this. They observe who changes according to convenience. They notice who becomes submissive around powerful people. They notice who tolerates disrespect from someone they want to impress. They notice who speaks about discipline while repeatedly breaking promises made to themselves. Inconsistency creates doubt, and where doubt grows, respect begins to disappear. Now imagine someone operating differently. Their standards do not change according to status. They remain respectful without becoming submissive, calm without becoming passive, confident without demanding attention. They keep their word even when nobody is watching. They behave according to the same principles when the reward is large and when there is no reward at all. Day after day, the message remains unchanged. Eventually, people stop testing them. Not because they were threatened, because experience has already taught them the result. Their reputation has become a silent warning. Disrespect will not produce a reward. One of the greatest mistakes people make is protecting an image instead of building character. An image concerns what people think of you today. Character determines what they will think of you after watching you for years. An image can be manufactured. Character cannot. You can carefully manage appearances for a long time, but pressure eventually reveals what is underneath. That is why real influence is built through hundreds of small decisions. Keeping the promise, maintaining the boundary, controlling the reaction, walking away when necessary, doing the difficult thing when nobody will applaud. Repeating these decisions until they no longer feel like decisions. They become identity, And once behavior becomes identity, respect no longer needs to be requested. It becomes associated with your name. There is a deeper psychological reason reputation becomes so powerful. People use the past to predict the future. If you have consistently demonstrated discipline, people expect discipline from you. If you have consistently remained calm under pressure, they expect composure. If you have consistently protected your boundaries, they expect consequences when those boundaries are crossed. This creates something stronger than intimidation. Expectation. People begin predicting your behavior before they act. They think about what happened the last time someone crossed the line. They remember how you responded. They remember that you did not shout, you did not threaten, you simply acted, and that memory influences what they do next. This is why the strongest people often do not need to defend themselves. Their history has already done the work. Others have seen them under pressure. They have watched them reject manipulation. They have watched them walk away from disrespect. They have watched them remain composed when someone attempted to provoke them. Those moments become part of the story people carry about them. Eventually, people begin treating them with greater care, not necessarily because they are afraid, because experience has taught them that crossing this person is not worth the cost. Never forget that every interaction contributes to your reputation. Every conversation, every promise, every compromise, every reaction, every moment when you choose discipline over impulse. You may never hear the conversations people have about you when you are absent, but those conversations influence opportunities, relationships, trust, and the amount of respect people are willing to give you. That is why every action matters. Every promise kept strengthens your reputation. Every boundary protected reinforces your authority. Every emotional reaction controlled adds another layer to your character. And every time you refuse to betray your own standards for temporary approval, you strengthen the one relationship that determines how you will live with yourself. In the end, making people think twice before disrespecting you is not about intimidation. It is not about aggression. It is not about making others afraid. It is about becoming difficult to manipulate. Become someone whose self-respect does not collapse under rejection, whose words have weight because they are not wasted, whose boundaries are consistent because they are not dependent on emotion, whose value continues growing because they never stop developing, whose emotions remain under their own command, and whose reputation is built from years of evidence rather than a few impressive words. At that point, something changes. You stop chasing respect. You stop explaining your worth. You stop demanding that people recognize your standards. Your behavior has already communicated everything necessary. People know what you tolerate. They know what you refuse. They know what happens when your boundaries are crossed. They know your presence has value. And most importantly, they know your self-respect cannot be negotiated. That is when respect becomes effortless. Not because you demanded it, but because your character has made disrespect a poor investment.